Hey there, Titans. Today, we're going to be talking about how to configure submission draft in Titan Flow. Let's take a look. So in order to demonstrate this, I've created a small approval process as my use case. And essentially what's going to be happening is we're going to have a user who is going to fill out some data. They're going to send for approval. Once it's approved, then they'll re-log into their project. And once they do so, they'll be pulling data back from the submission into their web project, and then they'll be able to push it to Salesforce. So what are submissions and how do they work? So what a submission is essentially is if you want to be able to save your data without having to actually push it to the relevant objects in Salesforce, you can actually save it to our submissions in our package and then bring that data back into your project. So first of all, you need to install our package in the App Exchange. Make sure you have the most updated package. And then what I have here is, first of all, I'm going to store the submission. So I've got a few variables here, and some of these are coming from my web project, like first, last, and email. But I also have a variable to store my submission ID. So let's just show you how to actually find this. You would go to Actions and Submissions, and you would do Store. And I'll show you, since I've already set this up, I've done Store, and I've got a few options here. I can either do it on the page, which will give me all of the different fields or variables on my page. I can do specific fields, meaning let's say just email, or I can do a field group, so maybe first and email, and only those. In my case, I'm doing a number of things on my page, so I'm just doing on page, and I'm going ahead and doing store. And then I'm storing my submission ID to my global variable over here, submission ID. All right. Once I get that submission ID, I'm actually going to push that submission ID to my SmartV user in Salesforce. So whoever logged in here with SmartV, we're going to update this contact with their submission ID so that when they log back in, they'll have this submission ID and they'll be able to load in the submissions from their project. Then it's going to go through an approval process where someone will see the data, decide if it's okay, and if they approve, then we're going to be sending an email to our end user telling them to log back into the project, and I just have a URL for the project here. All right, so that's in terms of the store. Now, of course, we can also load into Flow. That's not exactly what's happening in this use case. In this use case, the load is happening in web, but I'll show you just how it would work in Flow. I can go ahead and do submissions, load. Again, decide where my submission ID is coming from. In this case, it would come from my global variable submission ID. I would need my project ID, which I can take from here static, or I could set up a variable to hold this. And I need to, again, decide what I want to load, and I would pass along the proper parameters. But again, in our case, we're actually doing this in web, and I'll show you how we're doing it. I wrote a condition here that if I do get a submission ID from when I log in SmartV, then I want to load the submissions. And this is really important. If you're carrying over from a different project, so in this case, I'm loading a submission that was made in Titan Flow. So for my project ID, I need to be taking the project ID from my Flow, not from my web project. And again, I'm using a variable that I'm passing my submission to on SmartV login. I'll show you that as well. So if I go over here to user access SmartV, I can see I'm passing along a couple parameters like contact ID and my submission ID in order to reload that submission. So let's take a look at this in action. I'll go ahead and preview. One last thing I want to show you is just that I'm triggering the flow when I'm doing send by approval. I'm just triggering our submission flow, and I'm passing along a couple of variables over to my flow in order to create that submission. So I'm passing first name, last name, and email to the flow, and then the flow is storing those variables in the submission. Let's take a look. Okay, I'm logging in with SmartV. And of course, I don't have a submission yet. And so my submission did not run. My submission load did not run. But let's create one now. Do your own Titan. And I'll give a good email. And I'll send for approval. So now my approver should be getting an email with the data, and he can decide if he wants to approve it. Meanwhile, that data has already been submitted as a submission. I'm going to go ahead and approve. That should trigger my follow-up email. And here's my follow-up email. Your data has been approved. Hello, your data has been approved, and you can push the data to Salesforce. So I'm going to enter this link, and it's going to have me log in again. And as you can see, that data loaded from submission. This is not coming from any this is not coming from an object in your Salesforce. It's coming from our package object of submissions. And now that I have this data, it's also giving me the option to push to Salesforce. And that's how you can do an approval process using submissions in Titan Flow. So again, all you need to do is head over to Actions, Submissions, Store, decide what fields you want to store, and then store that submission ID somewhere. And of course, you can load that back into a flow or back into the web project like I showed you here. Hope this is helpful, and that's how it's done.